In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where ancient races wielded powers beyond mortal comprehension, humanity was considered nothing more than primitive upstarts, barely worth acknowledging. The Draconian Empire, ruled by beings who could manipulate the very essence of life itself, had dismissed humans as incapable of true understanding. Their royal bloodline possessed healing abilities that could resurrect the dying, powers passed down through millennia of genetic perfection. But what happens when a simple human mechanic, armed with nothing but calloused hands and an understanding of broken things, accomplishes what an entire empire of magical healers cannot? Sometimes the most extraordinary miracles come from the most ordinary people, and sometimes the touch that saves a dying goddess comes not from divine power, but from the simple, honest work of human hands that know how to fix what's broken. The royal family of Draconis was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their technology or their weapons, it was in their refusal to accept that anything was truly beyond repair. The emergency beacon screamed across subspace frequencies, its desperate signal cutting through the cosmic static like a knife through silk. On the bridge of the cargo hauler Rust Bucket, Captain Jake Morrison wiped grease from his hands and squinted at the translation matrix, struggling to decode the alien distress call. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, his weathered face creasing into a frown. The universal translator was having fits trying to process the High Draconian dialect, but the core message was clear enough: medical emergency, royal vessel, immediate assistance required. Jake had been hauling scrap metal and spare parts between the Outer Rim colonies for the better part of 20 years. He'd seen his share of alien vessels, traded with species most humans only read about in xenobiology textbooks, but he'd never encountered actual draconian nobility. The dragon-like beings were the stuff of legend, ancient, powerful, and utterly convinced of their own superiority over younger races like humanity. His chief mechanic, Sarah Chen, poked her head up from the engine compartment where she'd been wrestling with a particularly stubborn plasma coupling. Her coveralls were stained with hydraulic fluid, and her short black hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat. "Captain, we picking up that distress call too?" she asked, wiping her hands on a rag. "My tools are practically vibrating from the signal strength." "Whatever's sending that is big." Jake nodded grimly. "Draconian royal barge, from what I can make out. Medical emergency." He paused, studying the readouts. "Sarah, I know you've got your hands full with the engine modifications, but we're not the kind of people who ignore distress calls," Sarah finished for him, already moving toward the navigation console. "Even from species that think we're barely evolved apes." "What's our ETA?" 3 hours at maximum burn, Jake replied, already plotting the course change. "But, Sarah, I need you to understand something. These aren't your average aliens. Draconians are older than human civilization. They've got technology that makes our best stuff look like stone knives and bearskins. More importantly, they've got abilities, genetic modifications accumulated over millions of years of evolution. They can manipulate biological systems in ways we can barely comprehend." Sarah raised an eyebrow as she began running diagnostics on their medical bay. "Sounds like you're trying to warn me off, Captain. But if they're so advanced, why are they calling for help from a human salvage ship?" It was a good question, one that nagged at Jake as they changed course toward the beacon source. The Rust Bucket wasn't exactly a medical vessel. Their sick bay consisted of a basic surgical suite, some general-purpose healing scanners, and a lot of hope. If the Draconians were calling for outside help, it meant their own advanced medical technology had failed them. The ship that came into view 3 hours later defied every expectation Jake had built up over decades of space travel. The Draconian vessel was massive, easily 10 times the size of the Rust Bucket, its hull crafted from what appeared to be living metal that shifted and flowed like water frozen in time. Organic curves blended seamlessly with geometric precision, creating something that was simultaneously alien and hauntingly beautiful. "Holy Mother of Stars," Sarah whispered, pressing her face against the viewport. "It's gorgeous. And, look at those energy readings, the entire ship is practically alive." Jake was more focused on the damage. Massive tears in the hull leaked atmosphere and exotic particles into space, while entire sections of the vessel had gone dark. Whatever had attacked the royal barge had hit it hard. The docking procedure was unlike anything in Jake's experience. Instead of mechanical clamps and airlocks, the Draconian ship grew extensions that embraced the Rust Bucket like living tendrils, creating a perfect environmental seal. The technology was so far beyond human understanding that it felt like magic. The reception committee that met them at the airlock was equally impressive and terrifying. 3 Draconians stood waiting, their reptilian features noble and alien in equal measure. They were tall, easily 8 feet in height, with scales that shimmered between deep emerald and gold. Their eyes held an intelligence that seemed to peer directly into one's soul, and, when they spoke, it was with voices that resonated like distant thunder. The leader, distinguished by elaborate ceremonial armor that seemed to be grown rather than forged, stepped forward. His translation device rendered his words in accented but precise English. "I am High Commander Zephyr, Guardian of the Royal House of Draconis. You honor us with your response to our distress call, humans, though I confess surprise at your modest vessel." Jake bristled slightly at the implied insult but kept his expression neutral. "Captain Morrison of the merchant vessel Rust Bucket. This is my chief mechanic and medic, Sarah Chen. We received your medical emergency beacon and came as quickly as we could." Zephyr's massive head tilted slightly, studying Sarah with particular interest. "A mechanic serves as your medical officer? How resourceful." The tone suggested he found human customs primitively amusing. "Sarah's the best at fixing things that are broken," Jake replied evenly. "Whether they're machines or people. Now, what seems to be the problem?" The High Commander's expression shifted, pride warring with desperate necessity. "Our situation is grave. The Royal Princess Lyralii was gravely wounded in the attack that damaged our vessel. Our most skilled biomancers have attempted every healing protocol known to our science, but her life essence continues to ebb. We calculate perhaps 6 hours before total cellular cascade failure." Sarah stepped forward, her tool bag slung over her shoulder. "Can we see her?" "Sometimes a fresh perspective helps, even if our technology isn't as advanced as yours." Zephyr exchanged glances with his companions, clearly torn between desperation and protocol. "The royal princess is sacred to our people. No non-Draconian has been permitted in her presence for over 1,000 years. The very suggestion borders on heresy." "But, you called for help," Jake pointed out reasonably. "That suggests your usual methods aren't working." The silence stretched for long moments before Zephyr's shoulders sagged slightly in defeat. "Follow me. But, understand, humans, that you are witnessing something unprecedented in Draconian history. The princess represents the pinnacle of our genetic achievements, the culmination of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Her loss would be catastrophic for our empire." The journey through the ship's corridors was like walking through a living organism. Walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, floors yielded slightly underfoot like cartilage, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy. Sarah's scanner went crazy trying to process the readings, while Jake found himself constantly fighting vertigo as the ship's geometry seemed to shift around them. They passed dozens of Draconians in the corridors, all of whom stopped and stared at the humans with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Conversations died as they walked by, replaced by whispered discussions in the sibilant Draconian language. "They're not exactly rolling out the welcome mat," Sarah murmured to Jake. "Can you blame them?" Jake replied quietly. "We're probably the first humans most of them have ever seen in person. To them, we're curiosities at best." The princess's chambers were located in the heart of the vessel, protected by layer upon layer of security fields and guardian protocols. As they approached, the very air grew thick with power, making Jake's teeth ache and causing Sarah's equipment to emit warning beeps. Zephyr paused at the final doorway, his expression grave. "Beyond this portal lies Princess Lyralii, heir to the Draconian throne and keeper of our people's genetic legacy. She was, the most perfect example of our species ever created. Bioengineered over countless generations, her cellular structure approaches theoretical perfection." The chamber beyond was vast and filled with an otherworldly beauty. Crystalline formations grew from floor and ceiling, pulsing with soft light that cast dancing shadows throughout the space. Medical equipment that looked more like art installations than diagnostic tools surrounded a raised dais in the center of the room. And, on that dais lay the princess. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Whatever she had expected, it wasn't this. Princess Lyralii was beautiful in a way that defied human understanding, her features a perfect blend of reptilian and humanoid characteristics. Her scales shimmered with an inner light that was slowly fading, and her breathing was so shallow it was barely perceptible. But what struck Sarah most forcefully wasn't the princess's alien beauty, it was the wrongness she could sense in every line of her body. Something was broken here, something fundamental, and Sarah's mechanic instincts screamed that whatever was wrong went deeper than mere injury. What exactly happened to her? Sarah asked, approaching the medical displays with professional interest. A new voice answered from the shadows. She was caught in a quantum cascade explosion when our enemies struck the ship. The speaker emerged into the light, another draconian, this one wearing robes that seemed to be woven from starlight itself. I am Biomancer Kethral, chief healer of the royal house. The princess's cellular matrix was disrupted at the quantum level. Every attempt we have made to restore proper function has failed. Sarah studied the readouts, her enhanced vision processing the alien medical data with growing understanding. This isn't just cellular damage. Look at these patterns, it's like her entire biological system is fighting itself. Every cell trying to repair in a different way, creating chaos instead of healing. Biomancer Kethral's head snapped up, his golden eyes widening. You can read our medical displays? Biomechanical systems follow universal principles, Sarah replied absently, her attention focused on the princess. Energy flow, feedback loops, system integration, the specifics might be different, but the fundamentals are the same whether you're dealing with a plasma conduit or a circulatory system. She approached the dais slowly, her trained eye taking in details that the sophisticated draconian equipment might have missed. The princess's breathing was irregular, her scales dulled with pain, and there was a tremor in her hands that spoke of systemic failure. Has anyone tried manual intervention? Sarah asked, setting down her tool bag. Manual? Zephyr's voice was sharp with confusion. What do you mean? Sarah rolled up her sleeves, revealing hands calloused from decades of mechanical work. Sometimes, when a system is locked in a failure loop, it needs external input to break the cycle. A reset, if you will. In machines, I'd use my hands to feel for the problem, to provide the exact pressure or adjustment needed. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Biomancer Kethral looked like Sarah had suggested burning down the royal palace. You propose to touch the royal princess? His voice was barely a whisper. With your primitive appendages? Jake stepped forward, recognizing the danger signs. Sarah, maybe we should think about this. No. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. Look at her. Really look at her. Your advanced healing is trying to force her system back into perfect alignment, but perfect isn't what she needs right now. She needs someone to help her find her own balance. She moved closer to the princess, her hands hovering just above the pale skin. I can feel it from here, the disruption in her energy patterns. It's like a machine with misaligned components, each part working against the others instead of together. This is madness, Biomancer Kethral hissed. You speak of the princess as if she were one of your crude mechanical devices. Sarah looked up, meeting his golden gaze steadily. Every complex system, biological or mechanical, follows the same basic principles. Input, processing, output, feedback. When something breaks down, sometimes the most sophisticated repair techniques make things worse by trying too hard to force a solution. She paused, studying the assembled draconians. You said she has maybe 6 hours left. Your methods aren't working. What do you have to lose by trying something different? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jake could see the internal struggle playing out on Zephyr's reptilian features, pride warring with desperation, tradition battling against the stark reality of their situation. Finally, the High Commander's shoulders sagged in defeat. Do what you must, human. But, know that if you fail, if your primitive methods cause further harm to the princess, you will answer to the full might of the Draconian Empire. Sarah nodded solemnly. Understood. But, I'm not going to fail. Not if there's anything I can do to prevent it. She turned back to the princess, her hands steady despite the enormous pressure of the moment. Around them, the assembled Draconians watched in horrified fascination as a simple human mechanic prepared to attempt what their greatest healers could not accomplish. The fate of an empire, Sarah realized, might well rest in her calloused, grease-stained hands. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reached toward Princess Lyralii, not from fear but from the incredible energy radiating from the dying Draconian's body. It was like approaching a malfunctioning fusion reactor, power thrumming through every cell, but chaotic and destructive rather than controlled and purposeful. Wait, Biomancer Kethral stepped forward, his voice tight with concern. You must understand the magnitude of what you attempt. The princess's cellular structure operates on quantum frequencies that would instantly destroy normal biological matter. Your primitive nervous system cannot possibly. Sarah's fingers made contact with the princess's forehead, and the biomancer's words died in his throat. Instead of the explosive rejection everyone expected, something extraordinary happened. The chaotic energy patterns visible on the medical displays suddenly synchronized, forming coherent waves for the first time since the princess had been injured. Impossible, Kethral whispered, his golden eyes fixed on the readouts. The quantum resonance is stabilizing. How is this possible? Sarah closed her eyes, her consciousness expanding as she felt the intricate network of energy flowing through the princess's body. It was like nothing she had ever experienced. Imagine every circuit board, every power coupling, every delicate connection in a starship, but, instead of metal and crystal, everything was living tissue pulsing with bioelectric current. She's not dying from the injury, Sarah murmured, her voice distant and analytical. The damage triggered some kind of evolutionary defense mechanism. Her body is trying to adapt to a threat that's no longer there, creating cascade failures throughout her system. Her hands moved with practiced precision, fingers tracing pathways along the princess's neck and shoulders. To the watching Draconians, it looked like random touching, but Sarah was following energy flows, identifying bottlenecks and feedback loops with the same instinct that had served her for decades in engine rooms and repair bays. The quantum disruption created microfractures in her cellular matrix, she continued, her eyes still closed in concentration. Every time your healing protocols try to repair the damage, they trigger the defense response again. It's like trying to fix a plasma conduit while the power is still flowing, you just create more shorts. High Commander Zethvar leaned forward, his massive frame tense with concentration. Then, how do we stop the defense response? We don't stop it, Sarah replied, her hands now working along the princess's arms, finding pressure points that corresponded to major energy pathways. We redirect it. Show her system that the threat is gone, that it's safe to return to normal function. She opened her eyes, meeting Zethvar's gaze directly. But, I need help. Your biomancers understand the specific frequencies involved. I can feel the problems, but I need someone who can make the adjustments on a cellular level. Biomancer Kethral shook his head vehemently. This is unprecedented. To merge primitive touch therapy with advanced biomantic techniques, the risks are incalculable. The princess is going to die in 5 hours if we don't try something different, Jake pointed out from where he stood near the chamber entrance. Seems like the risks of doing nothing are pretty clear. Sarah's hands had found their way to the princess's chest, directly over her heart. The organ was beating irregularly, its rhythm disturbed by the conflicting signals from the compromised nervous system. But, as Sarah's fingers applied gentle pressure to specific points, the heartbeat began to steady. Look at the neural activity scans, Sarah said urgently. Do you see how the brain patterns are shifting? She's fighting her way back to consciousness, but she needs guidance. On the medical displays, waves of activity were indeed flowing through the princess's cerebral cortex in patterns none of the Draconians had seen before. The chaotic spikes of earlier were being replaced by organized, purposeful neural firing. Biomancer Kethral studied the readings with growing amazement. The synaptic pathways are restructuring themselves. But, this configuration, it's unlike anything in our medical databases. That's because she's adapting, Sarah explained, her hands now working along the princess's spine. The quantum disruption didn't just damage her existing systems, it forced her body to explore new evolutionary possibilities. She's becoming something unprecedented, even by Draconian standards. The implications hit the assembled aliens like a physical blow. Princess Lyralii wasn't just the heir to the throne, she was the culmination of millions of years of careful genetic refinement. If her cellular structure was evolving beyond known parameters, it could represent either the greatest advancement in draconian history or the complete destruction of everything they understood about their own biology. "This is why your healing techniques weren't working," Sarah continued, her voice taking on the rhythm of someone deep in professional flow. "You were trying to restore her to her original configuration, but that configuration no longer exists. She's becoming something new." Suddenly, the princess's eyes snapped open. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Princess Lyreliai's gaze was unfocused at first, pupils dilated as her visual cortex processed sensory input for the first time in days. But, as awareness returned, her eyes fixed on Sarah's face with startling intensity. When she spoke, her voice was like wind chimes made of silver, beautiful and alien and utterly commanding despite its weakness. Who are you?" The universal translator rendered her words in English, but with an accent unlike anything Sarah had heard before. "Sarah Chen," she replied simply, not breaking the contact between her hands and the princess's body. "I'm a mechanic. I fix broken things." The princess's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Am I broken?" "You were," Sarah said gently. "But you're healing now. Your body just needed help figuring out how to put itself back together." Princess Lyreliai tried to sit up, then gasped as waves of sensation flooded through her nervous system. "Everything feels different. Sharper. More real than before." Biomancer Kethral rushed forward, his instruments already scanning the princess with frantic intensity. "Your Highness, please remain still. Your cellular matrix is still stabilizing. The quantum resonance patterns are unlike anything we have encountered." The princess's attention shifted to Sarah's hands, still resting lightly on her chest. "You're human, aren't you? I can feel your life essence, so different from ours. Simple, but..." She paused, searching for words. "Pure. Uncomplicated by millions of years of genetic modification. Is that good or bad?" Sarah asked with a slight smile. "I'm not certain yet." The princess's voice was growing stronger with each passing moment. "But I believe it may be exactly what I needed. Your touch carries no preconceptions about what I should be. It simply accepts what I am becoming." High Commander Zethvar stepped closer, his expression a mixture of relief and profound confusion. "Your Highness, we feared we had lost you. The injury from the quantum cascade was not the real problem," Princess Lyreliai finished, her gaze now sharp and focused. "The real problem was that my body was trying to evolve, and our medical protocols were preventing the transformation." She looked at Sarah with something approaching wonder. But her touch showed my system a different path. One that preserved both what I was and what I am becoming. Sarah began to withdraw her hands, but the princess caught her wrist with surprising strength. "Please. Don't break the connection yet. I can feel the stability you provide. Without it, the chaos might return." "That's not going to be permanent," Sarah said with gentle firmness. "Your body needs to learn to maintain this balance on its own. But we can work on that together." Over the next hour, Sarah guided the princess through a series of exercises that were part physical therapy and part meditation. She taught her to feel the flow of energy through her own body, to recognize the signs of system stress and counteract them before they could cascade into failure. The watching Draconians were torn between amazement and horror at what they were witnessing. Their most perfect genetic creation was being coached in bodily awareness by a grease-stained human mechanic, and the techniques were working better than anything their advanced medical science could provide. "This is fascinating from a xenobiological perspective," Biomancer Kethral murmured to High Commander Zethvar. "The human's approach bypasses our entire medical paradigm. Instead of imposing corrections from outside, she teaches the body to heal itself from within." "But what does this mean for the princess's status?" Zethvar replied quietly. "If her genetic structure has been fundamentally altered, is she still truly draconian? Can she still serve as heir to the throne?" Their whispered conversation was interrupted as Princess Lyreliai slowly sat up, her movements fluid and controlled despite her recent near-death experience. The change in her appearance was subtle but unmistakable. Her scales held a deeper luster, her eyes seemed more luminous, and there was an aura of barely contained power surrounding her. "I can hear you," she said with amusement, her enhanced senses apparently including improved auditory acuity. "And, yes, High Commander, I am still draconian. Perhaps more so than ever before." She swung her legs over the edge of the medical platform, accepting Sarah's steadying hand as she stood for the first time in days. "But, I am also something new. The quantum cascade didn't just injure me, it unlocked evolutionary potential that has been dormant in our species for millions of years." The princess took a few experimental steps, her movements becoming more confident with each moment. "I can feel changes throughout my entire cellular matrix. Enhanced neural processing, improved energy conversion efficiency, quantum-level awareness of biological systems." She turned to face the assembled group, her bearing now unmistakably royal despite her transformed state. "I believe what happened to me was not an accident. Our enemies knew exactly what type of weapon to use, exactly how to disrupt draconian biology. But, they didn't account for the possibility of evolutionary adaptation." "You're saying this was planned?" Jake asked from his position near the doorway. "I'm saying someone wanted to kill me in a very specific way," Princess Lyralii replied, her voice hardening with resolve. "A way that would make it impossible for our healers to save me. They couldn't have predicted that a human mechanic would approach the problem from an entirely different angle." She reached out and took Sarah's hand, her touch now warm and steady instead of the chaotic energy from before. "You saved more than my life, Sarah Chen. You may have saved our entire species from a war we didn't even know we were fighting." The implications of her words sent a chill through the chamber. If the attack on the royal vessel had been deliberately designed to kill the princess in an unhealable way, it suggested their enemies had intimate knowledge of draconian biology and medical capabilities. "Who has that level of understanding of your physiology?" Sarah asked, her practical mind already working on the problem. Princess Lyralii's expression darkened. "Very few. And, most of them are supposed to be our allies." High Commander Zephyr's hand moved instinctively to his weapon. "Your Highness, if there are traitors within the Alliance, then, we need to be very careful about who we trust," the princess finished. "But, first, we need to understand exactly what has happened to me. These changes to my biology may be the key to preventing similar attacks in the future." She looked at Sarah with newfound respect and something that might have been friendship. "I would like you to stay, at least until we reach the capital. Your unique perspective may be crucial to understanding not just my transformation, but the threat we face." Sarah glanced at Jake, who nodded slowly. "We're haulers, not soldiers," he said carefully. "But, if someone's trying to commit genocide through biological warfare, I guess that makes it our business too. Besides," Sarah added with a slight grin, "I'd like to understand how this all works from a technical standpoint. Your biology is the most sophisticated system I've ever encountered. There's a lot I could learn." Princess Lyralii's laugh was like silver bells in a gentle breeze. "And, there is much you could teach, as you have already demonstrated." Perhaps this meeting was fate after all. As the medical displays continued to show stable readings, the tension in the chamber finally began to ease. The princess was not only alive but potentially more powerful than she had been before her injury. The immediate crisis was over. But, as Jake watched the interaction between Sarah and the alien princess, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at the beginning of something much larger than a simple rescue mission. The quantum cascade attack had been too precise, too specifically designed to target draconian biology. Someone out there had detailed knowledge of one of the galaxy's most advanced species and was willing to use that knowledge for murder. The Rust Bucket and her crew had answered a simple distress call. But they might have just stumbled into the opening moves of an interstellar war. The journey to the draconian capital world of Draconis Prime took 3 days aboard the royal vessel, which had been rechristened Ascending Phoenix after emergency repairs restored its critical systems. During that time, Sarah found herself in the unprecedented position of serving as personal physician to alien royalty, a role that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. The princess's transformation continued to unfold in remarkable ways. Her scales now held an iridescent quality that shifted between deep emerald and brilliant gold depending on her emotional state. More significantly, her sensory capabilities had expanded far beyond normal draconian ranges. She could detect quantum fluctuations in the ship's hull, sense the emotional states of crew members from across the vessel, and process information at speeds that amazed even her own people. "It's like watching evolution in real time," Sarah told Jake as they sat in the guest quarters that had been assigned to them. "Every day she demonstrates new abilities. Yesterday she helped the engineering crew identify microfractures in the propulsion system just by laying her hands on the bulkheads." Jake looked up from the technical manuals he'd been studying, draconian engineering texts that the crew had provided to help him understand their technology. "Sounds familiar. That's exactly what you do when troubleshooting mechanical problems." "That's what's so interesting," Sarah replied, leaning forward with excitement. "The quantum cascade didn't just trigger random mutations. It seems to have unlocked the ability to interface directly with complex systems, whether they're biological or mechanical. She's becoming a living diagnostic tool." Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle chime from the door communicator. Princess Lyreliai's voice came through the speaker, rendered in perfect English by the universal translator. "Sarah, Jake, would you join me in the observation deck? We're approaching Draconis Prime, and I believe you should see this." The observation deck was a marvel of draconian architecture, a transparent dome that provided a 360-degree view of space while somehow maintaining atmospheric pressure and temperature without any visible barriers. As they emerged from the ship's corridors into the dome, Sarah gasped at the sight that awaited them. Draconis Prime hung in space like a living jewel, its surface a swirling mixture of deep purples and brilliant golds that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. But what took Sarah's breath away wasn't just the planet's beauty, it was the massive orbital structures surrounding it. "Are those cities?" she asked, staring at the geometric forms that danced around the planet in complex orbital patterns. "Habitat rings," Princess Lyreliai confirmed, moving to stand beside them. Her transformed appearance was even more striking against the cosmic backdrop. She seemed to glow with an inner light that matched the planet below. "Each ring houses approximately 15 million of our people and serves a specific function: agricultural production, manufacturing, research, cultural preservation." Jake whistled softly, his engineer's eye taking in the impossible scale of the construction. "How do you maintain orbital stability with that many massive structures?" "Gravitational harmonics," the princess explained. Each ring is positioned at a specific distance and angle to create a resonance pattern that actually strengthens planetary stability rather than disrupting it. The mathematics involved took our greatest minds centuries to perfect. As they drew closer, more details became visible. The habitat rings themselves were works of art, their surfaces covered with what appeared to be living architecture that grew and shifted in organic patterns. Smaller vessels moved between the rings like schools of fish, following flight paths that seemed to flow rather than follow rigid corridors. "Your entire civilization is integrated with the natural world," Sarah observed with growing wonder. "Every structure, every system works in harmony with the planetary ecosystem." Princess Lyreliai nodded, but her expression had grown troubled. "That integration is our greatest strength, but it may also be our greatest vulnerability. If someone has found a way to weaponize our biological nature." She didn't finish the thought, but the implication hung heavy in the air. A civilization so thoroughly integrated with living systems would be uniquely vulnerable to biological warfare. The royal landing platform was a work of art in itself, rising from the planet's surface like a crystalline flower. As the ascending phoenix settled onto the organic docking cradles, Sarah could see crowds of draconians gathered to witness their princess's return. Word of her miraculous recovery had apparently spread throughout the system. But the reception committee waiting for them was notably tense. High-ranking officials in elaborate robes stood in rigid formation, their expressions unreadable but clearly strained. At their head stood a figure who could only be the emperor himself, massive even by draconian standards, his scales a deep midnight blue shot through with veins of silver, his presence radiating authority and barely contained worry. "Father," Princess Lyreliai said as they descended the ship's ramp, her voice carrying easily across the platform despite its conversational tone. Emperor Zethkaler's reply was in the High Draconian dialect, too rapid for the universal translators to process cleanly, but his tone suggested a mixture of relief, concern, and barely controlled anger. The princess responded in the same dialect, then, switched to English for the benefit of her human companions. Father expresses gratitude for our safe return, but concerns about the unprecedented nature of my recovery. An older draconian in robes that seemed to be woven from starlight stepped forward. Sarah recognized him as Biomancer Kethral from the ship. His report to the Emperor was delivered in clipped, professional tones, but Sarah caught enough familiar words to understand the general content. The Emperor's response was immediate and alarming. His voice rose to a roar that echoed across the landing platform, causing several of the assembled officials to step backward. The crowd of onlookers in the distance fell silent, sensing the tension even from their remote viewing positions. "What's he saying?" Jake asked quietly. Princess Lyreliai's expression had hardened into royal dignity tinged with defiance. "He questions whether I am still truly his daughter, given the extent of my biological transformation. He fears that what I have become might pose a threat to the genetic purity our people have spent millions of years achieving." The implications were staggering. The princess had been saved from certain death, had gained abilities that could benefit her entire species, and was being treated as a potential contamination by her own father. "That's ridiculous," Sarah said, her voice sharp with indignation. "You're more draconian than you ever were before. The changes enhanced what was already there, they didn't replace it." Her words, carried by the universal translator, caused a stir among the assembled officials. The idea that a human mechanic would contradict the Emperor's judgment was apparently unprecedented in draconian court protocol. Emperor Zethkaler's attention fixed on Sarah with laser intensity. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "The human presumes to understand draconian biology better than our greatest biomancers? Presumes to judge what my daughter has become?" Before Sarah could respond, Princess Lyreliai stepped forward, placing herself between her father and the humans. "The humans saved my life when our greatest biomancers could not." She understood what was happening to me when our most advanced medical technology failed. Perhaps it is time we acknowledge that our perspective may not be the only valid one. The standoff stretched for long moments, father and daughter locked in a battle of wills that carried implications far beyond personal conflict. Around them, the assembled court held its collective breath, sensing that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in their empire's history. Finally, Emperor Zethkaler's posture shifted slightly, not quite concession, but acknowledgement that the situation was more complex than he had initially assumed. "Very well. We shall convene the High Council to examine this matter properly. Biomancer Kethral will present his findings, the humans will be given opportunity to explain their methods, and we will determine what course of action serves the Empire best." He turned to address Sarah and Jake directly. "You will remain as guests of the royal court until this matter is resolved. Attempt to leave, and you will be detained as potential threats to imperial security. Cooperate, and you will be treated with the hospitality due to those who serve the crown." Jake nodded carefully. "We understand, Your Imperial Majesty. We're happy to cooperate." As the formal reception concluded and they were escorted toward the palace complex, Sarah found herself walking beside Princess Lyreliai through corridors that defied every expectation she had built up about alien architecture. The walls were alive, literally. Organic surfaces pulsed gently with bioluminescent patterns, while the floor beneath their feet had the resilience of living tissue. Gardens integrated seamlessly with structural elements, creating spaces that were simultaneously functional and breathtakingly beautiful. "This is incredible," Sarah murmured, running her fingers along a wall that responded to her touch with shifting patterns of light. "Your entire civilization is based on biotechnology." "It has been our way for millions of years," Princess Lyreliai replied, but her tone was troubled. "Every structure, every system, every aspect of our technology relies on engineered biological processes. It allows us to create beauty and efficiency impossible with purely mechanical systems." She paused at a junction where the corridor opened into a vast atrium filled with floating platforms and crystalline formations that sang with harmonic frequencies. "But it also means that anyone with detailed knowledge of our biology could potentially subvert our entire civilization. Our cities, our ships, our defenses, everything is vulnerable to the right kind of biological weapon." The magnitude of the threat was becoming clear. The attack on the royal vessel hadn't just been an assassination attempt, it had been a test. Someone was probing draconian biological defenses, learning how to target their genetic weaknesses. Who would have that kind of knowledge? Sarah asked as they continued through the living palace. That is what we must determine, the princess replied grimly. But the list is disturbingly short, and most of the names on it are supposed to be our closest allies. Their conversation was interrupted as they entered what was clearly a medical facility, though unlike any hospital Sarah had ever seen. Healing chambers grew from the floor like enormous flowers, their petals opening to reveal soft, glowing interiors. Diagnostic equipment seemed to float freely through the space, tending to patients with gentle, almost loving attention. Biomancer Kethral awaited them, along with several other medical specialists whose robes marked them as senior practitioners. Their expressions ranged from curious to openly hostile as they studied the human who had dared to question draconian medical superiority. The examination will begin immediately, Kethral announced, his tone professional but cold. We must determine the exact nature and extent of the princess's transformation, and evaluate whether it represents enhancement or contamination. Princess Lyralii submitted to the examination with royal dignity, but Sarah could sense her frustration with the entire process. As the biomancers deployed their diagnostic tools, living instruments that interfaced directly with the princess's nervous system, Sarah found herself studying their techniques with professional interest. You're trying to quantify something that's inherently qualitative, she observed after watching for several minutes. The lead biomancer, an ancient draconian whose scales had faded to pearl white with age, turned to regard her with narrowed eyes. Explain. You're measuring specific biological parameters and comparing them to established baselines, Sarah continued. But the princess's transformation isn't just about changed numbers, it's about changed relationships between systems. She's not just stronger or faster or more sensitive. She's integrated in ways that didn't exist before. To demonstrate her point, Sarah approached one of the diagnostic displays. Look at these neural activity patterns. You're interpreting them as chaotic because they don't match traditional draconian brain function. But they're not chaotic, they're more complex. She's processing multiple types of information simultaneously in ways your equipment wasn't designed to measure. The assembled biomancers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with having their methods questioned by a non-draconian. But the data was undeniable, the princess's transformed biology was operating on principles that their traditional medical science couldn't fully comprehend. As the examination continued, Sarah found herself drawn into increasingly technical discussions with the draconian medical team. Despite their initial hostility, they couldn't ignore the fact that her insights consistently revealed patterns in the data that they had missed. The human may be primitive, the ancient biomancer admitted grudgingly, but her perspective reveals aspects of the princess's condition that our more sophisticated analysis overlooked. It was a backhanded compliment, but Sarah took it in the spirit intended. She was beginning to understand that for all their advanced technology and millions of years of evolution, the draconians had become locked into ways of thinking that sometimes prevented them from seeing new possibilities. Sometimes the best solutions come from outside the system, she replied diplomatically. Fresh eyes can spot problems that experience might overlook. As the formal examination concluded, Princess Lyralii stood and addressed the assembled medical team. What is your assessment? The ancient biomancer consulted his colleagues briefly before responding. Your cellular matrix has been fundamentally altered at the quantum level. The changes appear stable and potentially beneficial, but they represent a departure from established draconian genetic parameters. Whether this constitutes evolution or deviation remains unclear. The political implications of that uncertainty were enormous. If the princess was no longer considered genetically draconian, her claim to the throne could be challenged. If the transformation was seen as contamination rather than enhancement, she might be quarantined or worse. But, as Sarah looked at the princess, her enhanced awareness, her improved capabilities, her fundamental nobility enhanced rather than diminished by the changes, she knew they were looking at the future of the draconian species. The question was whether the rest of the empire would be able to accept that future. The High Council of Draconis convened in the Chamber of Eternal Wisdom, a vast spherical space that hung suspended at the center of the palace complex like a crystalline heart. Sarah had never seen anything like it. The chamber's walls were transparent, offering a breathtaking view of the capital city sprawling beneath them, while the floor was a living mandala that shifted and flowed in response to the emotions of those within. Representatives from across the Draconian Empire filled the chamber's organic seating, which had grown from the floor to accommodate each individual's specific anatomy. Sarah and Jake sat in specially modified chairs near Princess Lyralii, their presence a breach of protocol that had required direct imperial intervention to arrange. Emperor Zethkalar occupied the chamber's central position, his massive form imposing even among a gathering of his own people. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the space without technological amplification, a feat made possible by the chamber's acoustic properties. "We gather to address a matter unprecedented in our empire's history," he began, his words rendered in multiple languages by the chamber's translation matrix. "The heir to our throne has undergone biological transformation that challenges our understanding of what it means to be draconian. We must determine whether this change represents evolution or contamination, enhancement or corruption." Biomancer Kethral rose from his position among the medical advisors, his report already compiled and ready for presentation. "Honored counselors, my examination of Princess Lyralii reveals cellular modifications that extend to the quantum level. Her neural processing capacity has increased by approximately 300%, her sensory sensitivity has expanded into previously unknown frequency ranges, and her ability to interface with biological systems now approaches theoretical perfection." Murmurs arose from the assembled counselors, some expressing wonder at the princess's enhanced capabilities, others voicing concern about the implications of such radical change. However, Kethral continued, his tone becoming more grave, these modifications were triggered by a quantum cascade weapon specifically designed to target draconian cellular structure. The fact that our princess survived and evolved rather than died suggests that the attack may have been intended as a test rather than an assassination. The implications sent a chill through the chamber. Princess Lyralii rose gracefully from her position, her transformed appearance drawing every eye as she moved to the center of the speaking area. "Honored counselors," she began, her voice carrying new harmonics that resonated strangely in the chamber's acoustics, "I believe we face a threat greater than any in our recorded history. Someone with intimate knowledge of our biology is conducting experiments, learning how to weaponize our greatest strengths against us." She gestured toward Sarah and Jake, acknowledging their presence despite the unprecedented nature of their attendance at such a gathering. "Were it not for the unexpected intervention of these humans, beings whose biological simplicity allowed them to see solutions invisible to our own medical science, I would have died as the weapon's creators intended." Counselor Vrexthal, an ancient female whose scales had faded to silver with age, leaned forward in her living chair. "You speak of enemies with detailed knowledge of our physiology. The circle of those possessing such information is extremely limited." "Indeed," Princess Lyralii replied, her enhanced senses apparently detecting undercurrents in the chamber that others missed. "Which is why I requested that our intelligence services conduct discreet investigations into recent activities of our closest allies." High Commander Zethvar stepped forward, his military bearing evident even in the formal council setting. "Your Highness, those investigations have yielded disturbing results." The chamber fell silent, the living floor beneath them shifting to darker patterns as the emotional atmosphere grew tense. Emperor Zethkalar gestured for the commander to continue. 3 months ago, the Altarian Federation requested detailed biological samples for what they claimed was a joint medical research project, Zethvar reported. 2 months ago, the crystalline hegemony acquired blueprints for our bioship construction techniques through diplomatic channels. 1 month ago, the Psion Collective was granted access to our genetic archives for what they termed historical research purposes. The pattern was clear and chilling. 3 of the Draconian Empire's most trusted allies had systematically gathered the information necessary to create weapons specifically designed to target Draconian biology. Counselor Myrxf, a younger member known for his analytical mind, spoke into the stunned silence. "But why would our allies seek to harm us? The mutual defense treaties mean nothing if they have decided we represent a threat to their own expansion," Princess Lyralii interrupted, her voice sharp with understanding. "Consider our position in the galaxy. We control the most advanced biotechnology, the most efficient production methods, the most sustainable colonial systems. If someone wanted to dominate this sector, they would need to eliminate us first." Sarah found herself rising from her chair, driven by sudden insight. "May I speak, Your Imperial Majesty?" The request sent ripples of shock through the chamber. Humans simply didn't address the High Council without formal permission and elaborate protocol. But Emperor Zethkaler, perhaps recognizing that unprecedented situations called for unprecedented approaches, gestured for her to continue. The attack pattern makes more sense if you think of it as industrial espionage rather than warfare, Sarah said, her mechanical engineer's perspective bringing new clarity to the situation. They weren't trying to kill the princess, they were trying to understand how draconian biology responds to specific types of quantum disruption. She moved to stand beside Princess Lyrelii, gesturing toward the various displays showing biological data. The weapon was designed to cause exactly the type of cascade failure that your normal healing methods can't address. But it was also designed to preserve the victim long enough for detailed study of the failure process. Jake stood as well, his own understanding clicking into place. It's like reverse engineering, but with living systems. They attack you in a controlled way, study how you try to heal, then develop better attacks based on what they learn. The mathematical precision of the strategy was horrifying in its implications. The Alliance species weren't planning a conventional war, they were planning systematic biological genocide, using the Draconians' own advanced healing capabilities against them. Princess Lyrelii's scales shifted to deep red, the color of draconian anger. They turned our rescue beacon against us. They knew that any draconian medical team would be unable to save me, ensuring that my death could be studied in detail. They didn't account for human intervention. Counselor Vrexthal's voice carried the weight of her centuries when she spoke. If this analysis is correct, then our entire medical infrastructure is compromised. Every healing protocol, every bioenhancement, every aspect of our biological superiority has been studied and catalogued by potential enemies. The chamber erupted into urgent discussions as the full scope of the threat became apparent. Genetic weapons could be deployed through their food systems, their atmosphere, even their living architecture. The very biotechnology that made their civilization possible could be turned into a weapon of unprecedented lethality. But Princess Lyrelii raised her hand, and her enhanced presence somehow commanded immediate attention from every being in the chamber. When silence fell, she spoke with the authority of someone who had faced the enemy's weapon and survived. "We are not defenseless," she declared. "My transformation wasn't just survival, it was adaptation. My body learned to recognize and counter the quantum cascade weapon. That knowledge can be shared." Biomancer Kethral stepped forward, his expression shifting from concern to fascination. "You believe the adaptive modifications in your cellular matrix could be replicated?" "Not replicated," Princess Lyrelii corrected. "But the principles could be taught. My enhanced sensory capabilities allow me to detect the specific quantum signatures of biological weapons before they can take effect. My modified neural processing can calculate counter-responses in real time." She turned to address Sarah directly. "But I cannot do this alone. The human approach to biological systems, treating them as complex machines rather than sacred evolutionary achievements, reveals vulnerability points and repair methods that our traditional medicine misses." The suggestion sent another wave of shock through the chamber. The princess was proposing that human methodology be integrated into draconian medical science, a concept that challenged millions of years of cultural and scientific tradition. Emperor Zethkaler studied his transformed daughter with expressions that mixed pride, concern, and something that might have been fear. "You propose to teach our people to think like humans?" "I propose to teach our people to survive," Princess Lyrelii replied with quiet firmness. "The enemy has spent months learning to think like draconians. Perhaps it's time we learn to think differently ourselves." Counselor Myrxf leaned forward, his analytical mind already working through the implications. "The theoretical framework has merit. Human biological systems are far simpler than ours, but that simplicity might provide clarity that our complexity obscures." Sarah found herself at the center of attention as dozens of alien gazes fixed on her. "The basic principle is universal problem solving," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the enormity of the situation. "When a system fails, you identify the failure points, isolate them from the functional components, and restore proper connections between working parts." She gestured toward the princess. Her Highness's body was trying to heal itself, but the healing process was creating more problems. By stopping the healing long enough to let her system find its natural balance, we allowed adaptation to occur instead of forcing repair. Biomancer Kethral's eyes widened with understanding. You taught her biological system to evolve actively instead of passively accepting damage. The quantum cascade weapon was designed to exploit our healing protocols, but it couldn't account for deliberate evolutionary adaptation. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. And now she can recognize the weapon's signature and trigger the same adaptive response in others, but much faster and without the near-death experience. The strategic implications were staggering. If Princess Lyralii could teach other Draconians to recognize and adapt to biological weapons in real time, the enemy's primary advantage would be neutralized. More than that, the Draconians might gain capabilities their attackers never expected. High Commander Zephyr stepped forward, his military mind already planning implementation. How quickly can this knowledge be disseminated? Our intelligence suggests that the Alliance species are preparing to move from testing phase to active deployment. Princess Lyralii's expression grew grim. That depends on how willing our people are to accept fundamental changes to our medical and biological paradigms. What I'm proposing isn't just a new treatment, it's a new way of understanding ourselves. Emperor Zethkaler rose from his central position, his massive presence commanding absolute attention from the assembled council. The choice is clear, he declared. We can maintain our traditional approaches and face extinction, or we can adapt and survive. The humans saved my daughter when our greatest healers could not. Perhaps it is time to acknowledge that wisdom can come from unexpected sources. He turned to address Sarah and Jake directly. Will you help us? Will you teach our people your methods of seeing problems clearly and finding practical solutions? Jake looked at Sarah, then back at the Emperor. We're haulers, not teachers. But if it means preventing genocide, then yes. We'll do whatever we can. Sarah nodded her agreement, but her mind was already racing ahead to the practical challenges they would face. We'll need to start with your medical teams, teach them to see biological systems as integrated machines rather than sacred mysteries. But, Your Imperial Majesty, there's something else you need to consider. What? If your enemies are willing to spend months gathering intelligence and developing biological weapons, they're not going to stop just because we foil their first attempt. They'll adapt their tactics just like the princess adapted her biology. This is going to be an ongoing arms race, and staying ahead of it will require constant innovation. Princess Lyralii smiled, the expression transforming her alien features with warmth and determination. Then, it's fortunate that we now have the galaxy's most accomplished mechanic to help us keep our biological machinery running properly. As the High Council moved into formal session to ratify the new emergency protocols, Sarah found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed. 3 days ago, she had been a simple mechanic hauling scrap metal between colonial outposts. Now she was apparently becoming a military medical advisor to an alien empire. But, as she watched Princess Lyralii begin demonstrating her enhanced abilities to the assembled biomancers, Sarah realized that the most important change wasn't in her circumstances, it was in the fundamental understanding that intelligence and wisdom could emerge from the most unexpected places. The war for the galaxy's future had begun, and its outcome might well depend on the willingness of an ancient, proud civilization to learn from the simplest members of the youngest spacefaring species. 6 months after the attack on Princess Lyralii, the Draconian Empire had transformed in ways that would have been unimaginable before the quantum cascade incident. The integration protocol, as historians would later call it, had fundamentally altered not just Draconian medical science, but their entire approach to biological engineering and system maintenance. Sarah stood in the newly constructed Human Draconian Medical Research Center, watching as teams of mixed-species medical practitioners worked together on problems that had puzzled xenobiologists for decades. The center itself was a marvel of hybrid architecture, draconian biotechnology seamlessly integrated with human mechanical engineering principles to create something entirely new. The third wave of bioweapon attacks was neutralized within minutes of deployment, Princess Lyralii reported as she joined Sarah at the observation deck. The princess's transformation had continued over the months, her enhanced abilities now including the capacity to interface directly with the center's biological computer systems. Our new rapid response teams detected the quantum signatures immediately and deployed countermeasures before any casualties occurred. Sarah nodded with satisfaction, but her expression remained troubled. The attacks are getting more sophisticated, though. They're learning from each failure, adapting their weapons faster than we initially expected. Below them, a mixed team of draconian biomancers and human engineers was working on what they called the Early Warning Network, a biological sensor grid that could detect hostile quantum patterns across entire star systems. The human contribution had been the insight that such a system needed to be built like a mechanical network, with redundant pathways and fail-safe protocols, while the draconian contribution provided the biological sensitivity needed to detect attacks before they reached critical targets. Dr. Patterson's team achieved another breakthrough yesterday, Princess Lyralii continued, referring to the human biochemist who had arrived 3 months earlier as part of the expanded cooperation program. They've successfully created hybrid biomechanical interfaces that allow our healing systems to be monitored and controlled using human diagnostic principles. The success of the integration protocol had surprised everyone, including its creators. What had begun as a desperate attempt to counter biological warfare had evolved into a revolutionary approach to medical science that combined the best aspects of both species' capabilities. Human analytical methods provided clarity and systematic problem solving, while draconian biotechnology offered sensitivity and adaptability beyond anything mechanical systems could achieve. But the real breakthrough had come when they realized that the hybrid approach wasn't just more effective than either species' individual methods, it was creating entirely new possibilities for biological enhancement and system integration. Jake's been working with the shipyard crews, Sarah mentioned, gesturing toward the massive orbital construction facility visible through the center's transparent walls. The new hybrid vessels are testing beyond all expectations. Draconian biohulls with human mechanical redundancy systems and integrated diagnostic networks. The ships being built in the orbital yards represented a new class of vessel entirely. Instead of choosing between biological or mechanical systems, the hybrid designs used both approaches where each was most effective. Living hulls that could adapt to damage and seal breaches automatically, but with mechanical backup systems that could maintain functionality even if the biological components were compromised. Sensor networks that combine draconian biological sensitivity with human electronic precision. Princess Lyralii's expression grew thoughtful as she watched the construction activity. The enemy alliance has been forced to completely revise their strategic assumptions. Their biological weapons were designed to exploit purely draconian systems, and their conventional weapons were optimized against purely human technology. Our hybrid approach presents them with problems they didn't anticipate. But they're not giving up, Sarah observed. The intelligence reports suggest they're developing new attack vectors specifically designed to target hybrid systems. Which is why the Emperor has approved the next phase of the integration protocol, Princess Lyralii replied, her voice carrying a note of barely contained excitement. Sarah turned from the observation window, studying the princess's expression. What next phase? Voluntary biomechanical integration for willing participants from both species. Not just cooperation between our peoples, but actual biological merger of our capabilities. The implications were staggering. Sarah had seen the preliminary research theoretical work on creating hybrid beings that combine human analytical capabilities with draconian biological sensitivity. The potential benefits were enormous, but so were the risks. The ethical considerations alone, Sarah began, have been debated extensively by both our species' greatest philosophers, Princess Lyralii interrupted gently. The conclusion was that when facing extinction, ethical considerations must be balanced against survival necessities. But participation is entirely voluntary, and the process is reversible. As if summoned by their conversation, Jake appeared in the observation deck's entrance, his expression a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Sarah, you need to see this. The first batch of volunteers is ready for the preliminary integration procedures. They made their way to the center's integration laboratory, a space that looked like something from science fiction even by the standards of their advanced technological environment. Volunteer participants lay in biomechanical cocoons that monitored their vital signs while gradually introducing hybrid modifications to their cellular structures. The volunteers were a diverse group, draconian medical specialists seeking enhanced analytical capabilities, human engineers wanting direct biological interface abilities, even a few individuals from other species who had requested permission to participate in the experimental program. Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the human volunteers, was undergoing integration with draconian sensory enhancement modifications. Sarah watched the monitoring displays as Elena's nervous system gradually adapted to process quantum-level biological information directly. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked through the communication interface. Elena's voice came back filled with wonder. "I can feel every biological system in this room. Not just the people, but the living walls, the biocomputers, even the bacterial cultures in the research labs down the hall. It's like suddenly being able to see colors that didn't exist before." In the adjacent cocoon, Biomancer Threxcall was receiving human-derived analytical enhancement modifications. His reports were equally remarkable. "The patterns are so clear now," he communicated. "Before, I could sense biological irregularities, but I couldn't quantify them or predict their development. Now I can see the mathematical relationships underlying biological processes. I can calculate optimal healing strategies in real time." Princess Lyralii moved between the various cocoons, her own enhanced senses monitoring each participant's progress with precision that impressed even the sophisticated monitoring equipment. "The integration is proceeding better than our most optimistic projections. The hybrid modifications aren't just additive, they're synergistic." The observation proved prophetic. As the first integrated volunteers completed their modifications and began testing their new capabilities, it became clear that they had gained abilities neither species possessed individually. Enhanced pattern recognition allowed them to detect problems and develop solutions with unprecedented speed and accuracy. Biological sensitivity combined with analytical processing enabled them to understand complex systems intuitively. But the most significant development came 2 weeks later, when the integrated volunteers made a discovery that changed everything. Sarah was reviewing daily reports when Princess Lyralii burst into her office, her scales shifting rapidly through the color spectrum, a sign of extreme excitement in Draconians. "Sarah, you must come immediately. The integration team has found something extraordinary." They rushed to the research laboratory, where the volunteers were gathered around a biomechanical display showing galactic communication patterns. Dr. Vasquez looked up as they entered, her expression a mixture of amazement and concern. "We've been monitoring the quantum signatures of the bioweapon attacks," she explained, her enhanced senses allowing her to interface directly with the detection network. "But, with our improved pattern recognition, we started noticing secondary signatures, traces that the enemy probably didn't realize they were leaving." Threxcall continued the explanation from his position at the analysis station. "The bioweapons aren't just targeting our people randomly. There's a specific pattern to the attacks, a systematic approach to gathering information about our defensive responses. But, more importantly," Dr. Vasquez added, "we can now track the quantum signatures back to their source. We know where the weapons are being manufactured, and we know who's behind the attacks." The display shifted to show a star map with highlighted systems, trade routes, and communication networks. The pattern that emerged was clear and shocking. "The Galactic Trade Consortium," Sarah breathed, recognizing the commercial network that controlled much of the galaxy's economic activity. "They're not just coordinating the attacks, they're orchestrating them." Princess Lyralii studied the data with her enhanced analytical capabilities. "The consortium has been manipulating the Alliance species, convincing them that we represent a threat to galactic stability. But the real goal is economic control. They want to eliminate our biotechnology advantage so they can dominate galactic markets." The revelation reframed everything they thought they knew about the conflict. This wasn't a war between species, it was a corporate takeover attempt using biological warfare as the primary weapon. "But now we can prove it," Threxcall announced with satisfaction. "The quantum signature traces provide irrefutable evidence of the consortium's involvement. We can present this to the Galactic Council." Jake, who had been studying the tactical implications, looked up with a grim expression. "That's assuming the Council isn't already compromised. The consortium has a lot of influence with member species." Princess Lyralii's scales shifted to the deep blue of determined resolve. "Then, we don't rely on the Council. We take the evidence directly to the people, all the people, of every species. The consortium's strength comes from operating in shadows. Exposure will eliminate their advantage. Over the following weeks, the integrated volunteers used their enhanced capabilities to compile evidence that was impossible to refute. Quantum signature traces, communication intercepts, financial records, everything needed to prove the consortium's guilt. But, more importantly, they also developed countermeasures that could protect not just Draconians, but any species targeted by the consortium's bioweapons. The Revelation campaign began simultaneously across dozens of star systems. Integrated volunteers, now serving as ambassadors for the hybrid program, presented evidence to government officials, scientists, and media representatives throughout known space. Their enhanced capabilities allowed them to detect lies, predict reactions, and adapt their presentations for maximum effectiveness with each species they encountered. The response was swift and decisive. Species that had been manipulated into hostility toward the Draconians suddenly understood they had been played by commercial interests. The alliance that had threatened Galactic War dissolved as its members realized they had been used as pawns in a corporate power grab. But the consortium's response was equally swift and far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Massive fleet movements throughout the outer systems, Jake reported as he burst into the research center's command room. They're not trying to hide anymore, the consortium is launching an open military assault. The display screen showed the approaching threat, hundreds of vessels bearing consortium markings, equipped with weapons systems that defied several interspecies treaties. The corporate entity that had hidden behind manipulation and subterfuge was now revealing the military might it had accumulated through decades of quiet preparation. Princess Lyralii studied the tactical situation with her enhanced strategic processing capabilities. They know their biological weapons are no longer effective against us, so they're switching to conventional warfare. But they've underestimated how much we've learned from integration. She turned to address the assembled team of integrated volunteers, humans, and Draconians. We have something the consortium never anticipated: true cooperation between species, enhanced by technological and biological integration. We don't just have better ships and weapons. We have better understanding, better coordination, and better adaptation to unexpected challenges. The battle, when it came, was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Hybrid vessels with living hulls and mechanical redundancy proved nearly impossible to disable. Integrated crews could process tactical information, predict enemy movements, and coordinate responses with precision that amazed even their own commanders. But the real advantage came from the integration volunteers themselves. Their hybrid capabilities allowed them to interface directly with both biological and mechanical systems, creating a level of ship pilot integration that turned each vessel into an extension of its crew's consciousness. The consortium's fleet, built around conventional assumptions about space combat, found itself facing opponents who could literally think faster, see more clearly, and adapt more quickly than anything they had planned for. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the consortium's military capability had been eliminated, its leadership arrested on charges of attempted genocide and illegal warfare, and its commercial empire dismantled by the very species it had tried to manipulate. But, as Sarah stood in the command center, watching the reports of victory stream in from across the galaxy, she realized that the most important victory wasn't military, it was the proof that cooperation and integration could overcome any challenge, no matter how sophisticated or well-funded. Princess Lyralii joined her at the observation window, where they could see the mixed fleet of human, Draconian, and other species vessels forming up in celebration formations. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "The threat is eliminated, but all these changes we've made, the integration program, the hybrid technologies, the new ways of thinking about biological and mechanical systems, continue," Princess Lyralii replied with certainty. "We've learned that our greatest strength isn't our individual capabilities, but our willingness to combine them with others. The integration protocol isn't just a military program anymore, it's the foundation for a new kind of civilization." She gestured toward the stars visible beyond the fleet formations. "A civilization where the best ideas can come from anyone, where problems are solved through cooperation rather than domination, where understanding different perspectives makes everyone stronger." Sarah smiled, thinking back to the simple distress call that had started this entire adventure. Not bad for a couple of haulers who just wanted to help someone in trouble. "The galaxy has always needed people willing to help when help is needed," Princess Lyralii replied. "The only difference now is that we've learned how to help each other become more than we ever could have been alone." As the Celebration fleet began its journey back to their respective home systems, carrying with them the knowledge and technologies that would reshape galactic civilization, Sarah reflected on the most important lesson they had all learned. Sometimes the greatest revolutions begin with the simplest acts of compassion, and the most powerful weapons against hatred and greed are understanding, cooperation, and the willingness to see past the surface differences to the common needs that unite all intelligent life. The Draconian Empire and humanity had started as strangers, become allies in desperation, and emerged as partners in a new kind of civilization that would serve as a model for the rest of the galaxy. And it had all begun with a human mechanic who knew how to fix broken things.